Hi guys, we are going to talk about second language acquisition, what it is, how we can use that knowledge to help us as educators, how we can use that knowledge to help our students grow, why it's important that we know about second language acquisition. So let's get started. Second language acquisition, what is that? Well, according to the American Speech Language Hearing Association, second language acquisition, or also known as SLA, is learning a second language after a first language is already established. And this will normally happen most often when students are going to school for the first time and learning English when it is not their native tongue, when they speak another language at home. Why do you need to know this? Why do I need to know this? Well, as an educator, I'm sure you guys have noticed the influx of diversity that we've seen inside of our classrooms. And with that diversity will come students whose L1 or first language is not English. And those students will need your support while they work on acquiring English as their second language. So it's important for us as educators to gain an understanding of everything that SLA, or second language acquisition, encompasses. There are many factors that will go into an individual acquiring a second language or English as their second language. Some of those factors can be their language their first language, their L1, what they speak at home, um, the amount of time that they have the opportunity to practice the second language at home, their intrinsic motivation for wanting to learn a second language, and also ultimately the reason why the second language is needed and understanding why that second language is needed. In the article that you guys read that I sent out for you guys to read, it talks about 5 different stages of second language acquisition. As I was doing some research, I found a source that added a stage, the beginning fluency stage, in between speech emergent and intermediate fluency. And I just felt like that was an important stage to include as we talk through this. Let's find out a little bit more about those stages and what you will see at each one of those stages. The first is the pre-production stage. This is also known as the silent period. This is when the student is taking in that new language and does not speak it, will not produce anything. The student will nod yes or no, perhaps. They do not verbalize. They have minimal comprehension in what they're hearing and reading. They could draw or point to things in order to communicate. The second stage is what's known as early production. This is when a student will use short word or phrases to communicate, has limited comprehension. They're starting to recognize keywords and familiar phrases, and this is when incorrect usage of present tense verbs will start to pop up. There will be a lot of errors as they tread into the water of learning a new language, and this is when those errors start to pop up. Stage 3 is, or the speech emergent stage. Their production of the second language becomes more frequent. They're starting to gain a little bit of confidence. The words, their vocabulary has expanded, sentences are longer, but they're still relying heavily on the context that's around them and familiar topics that they've already gained familiarity with. Vocabulary will increase and errors begin to decrease. Once again, hitting on those familiar topics, the more experience they have with certain topics and opportunities to practice reading and writing and speaking and listening to familiar topics, the more confident they're obviously going to feel in trying to produce something in the second language. Then we move on to the beginning fluency stage that I felt like needed to be addressed, um, as we discussed. This stage is when students are really starting to become pretty fluent in especially social situations. Um, and there are still errors, but they're minimal. There will most likely still be an accent from their native tongue. They will struggle to express themselves, but um, they should be able to do it pretty fluently. Intermediate fluency is when they're, we will say, fluent in their L2 or their second language or English, and will have very few errors during this stage. They have excellent comprehension and make very few grammatical errors. And the final stage is advanced fluency, which we all want our students to achieve. And that's when they are fluent and comfortable and confident and is pretty much near native level speech, but their L2 or their English, their second language. So how do we acquire another language? How do our students acquire a second language? Let's find out what two major second language acquisition theorists have found. The first that we're going to just kind of review quickly on is Krashen. He was discussed in the article, or his hypothesis and theories were discussed in the article that you guys read. So I just want to refresh your mind on those quickly. Right, that's a quick refresher of Krashen's five hypothesis. Let's see what Cummins has to say. Cummins is another very prominent second language acquisition theorist, and he is who we have responsible for BICS and CALP. And I just feel like this lady does an excellent job of explaining um, how the different quadrants work for those.
All right, we're going to have a quick review of Cummins' quadrant model for those of you that maybe don't remember it, or maybe it is new to you. When we talk about the four quadrants, and they're definitely labeled differently than our quadrants in math, when we talk about the first two quadrants, we're talking about cognitively undemanding tasks, things that are easy that we would ask our students to do. And when we're talking about the quadrants 3 and 4, we're talking about the harder things that we ask them to do, things that might require a little bit more brain power. Now, the difference is that here, we're going to give a lot of context clues. We are going to embed our task, whether they're easy or a little bit more cognitively demanding, we're going to embed them in a lot of context, a lot of clues. But over here, even though I have some easy tasks and some hard tasks, the context is going to be reduced for one reason or another. Let's talk about some specific examples, and that'll help. When I'm in this quadrant 1, and I am doing an easy task that has a lot of context, for example, talking on the playground, that's not a very difficult thing to do, and I have all kinds of playground equipment that I can see and touch and feel, and I can watch what the other kids are doing. So when someone is speaking to me, it's embedded in the context of the playground. Here I have an easy task, but the context has been reduced. So I'm just listening to a phone message, and that's not necessarily a difficult task. However, I don't have the clues of the person's facial expression or gestures to help me understand the message. So even though it's an easy task to listen to a phone message, I don't have a lot of context. Here, I'm asking my student to do something that is a little bit more difficult, but I'm going to give them lots of help in the way of context. So maybe I've got a more difficult math problem, but I'm going to give all kinds of manipulatives. Maybe I'm even going to draw a picture of this word problem on the board. I'm going to embed it in a lot of context. Here, I'm asking my student to do something that's difficult. I'm talking about some abstract concept. I always think of cells because we can't readily show our boys and girls cells in everyday life. We have to show them pictures of cells, or we have to get out a microscope and make something larger than it really is. So we're learning about something that to our students is abstract, but if I'm not giving them context, boy, I have just really made things difficult. So this fourth quadrant is the hardest one. I'm learning something that's cognitively demanding, and I'm not giving my students a lot of context, then I've got to think about that. This is just a little review, some little examples for you. Quadrant 1, 2, 3, and 4. The teacher's role is not to make academic tasks less demanding. Our role as educators is to support the student and to help them be successful by giving them lots of context. We want to activate their prior knowledge. We want to scaffold every task with a step-by-step procedure for success. So remember, we're not making it less cognitively demanding. We're not dumbing down our curriculum. So in other words, we want to take what is in quadrant 4. It's cognitively demanding, but because we don't have a lot of context here, we want to take what is in quadrant 4 and we want to think of a way to move it to quadrant 3. It's still cognitively demanding, but we're going to give lots of context.
I went ahead and stopped it right there because I feel like she said exactly what I wanted you guys to hear, and we were running short on time. Just to wrap everything up, why do we need to know about this? Because that diversity is coming into your classrooms, and you're going to need to help your students and to have a good understanding and good knowledge and foundation of how they're acquiring the second language and those stages that they are going through, for you to be able to know each stage and what they're going through in order to acquire their second language. You guys will, we as educators will be able to help them in that process. So next you will be doing some discovering on your own of some strategies that you can implement in each stage. Thanks. Talk to you guys later.